Alright, today we're going to make a rubber band banjo and a rubber band guitar. That way when we're done, we can start a band. It'd be a rubber band. Yeah, I know, it's a bad joke, but the kids cringe when I tell it, so it's worth it. Alright, so the pattern is going to be below this video. You will need the pattern for this project. Now, I do believe this is a 7-inch piece of wood. We're going to need 2 of those. That's going to form the body of the guitar. After that, we're going to need 2 5.5-inch pieces of wood, which will be the body of the banjo. You do not have to make sure these are overly precise at this point, because we're going to lay the pattern on top to cut the pattern out and all that good stuff. So just get these cut and re-rolling. I'm using oak. I'm going to use oak for the body, poplar for the neck, and then we'll use some poplar and oak for the other few pieces. I've kind of got it situated out where they kind of complement each other, little two-tone look to it. I like that look, and so that's what I go with. Whatever 1/4-inch stock you want, go for it. If you want to use a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch, you can, but it's going to be a much thicker body and much heavier. Alright, so now we need, this is 1/2 inch by 2 poplar, which is actually, the actual measurement is 1.5 inches wide. So it's actually a 1/2 inch thick and 1.5 inches wide. This is a piece of poplar. I usually go through and find stuff that is more on the white side, but I mean, if you know, because poplar can vary from white to green, so you know, use the kind you like. You know, if you want it to be more green, go for it. If you want to use a different type of 1/2 inch stock and make it all out of oak or something like that, I mean, go for it. This is not, it's just personal preference is all it is. So we need 2 9-inch pieces. That's for the necks of both the guitar and the banjo. Alright, now we need a 2-inch piece. And the 2-inch piece is going to then be cut in half. And it's going to be, I don't know if there's a name for it, but it's the bottom part that the strings get attached to. In this case, the strings being rubber bands. So that's the pieces you need. Alright, so we're going to set our miter saw at 45 degrees. And this is something that could be done on the sander, on a sanding wheel, or even left off completely. It's completely for the aesthetics. So we're going to come in about half. I'm not really measuring it. I'm just kind of knocking some off. We're actually using it as a gauge so that we can round it off later. So basically we're just coming through. We're coming about halfway in. And we're taking a 45-degree angle off. Now, that's going to be the same angle on, you see how it's angled there? It's going to be the same angle on the same side. So, nothing opposite. And all we're doing is just taking that edge off. And you can see right there, we went about halfway in, maybe a little more. And just kind of knock that edge off. That's all we're looking for right there. Alright. So, we've got the body of the guitar here. We've got our pattern cut out. We're going to line that up on the board. We're going to make sure that the spot on each side is even up, so, you know, it's more in the middle. And so I'm going to start with, this is the spot for the hole, because it'll have the little hollowed out spot for the guitar. So we're going to use a nail. Tap that in real good. Make sure it went through. And we're going to set that off to the side. Now in our 5.5-inch pieces, we need to find the center. Now this is for the banjo, because we're going to cut out the back of the banjo. This is a centering jig. I use it on all 4 sides just in case it's not not perfectly square, because nobody's perfect, but you could just line up. I'm kind of showing you here where you could just line up a piece of wood going from each corner to each corner and do it on both corners, and you can find the center. So all we're doing here is looking for the center, making a little nail hole. Alright, so we've got a 3.5-inch hole saw set up on our drill press. And we're just going to use that hole that we put in there for the nail to find where exactly that hole saw needs to go. And that 3.5 hole saw, this is the banjo. And I'm doing these both together on a video because, well, they have very, very similar glue ups past the body. And it just didn't really seem right to do a video for each one. So we're doing them together. But like I said, then we can start a whole band. So we're just taking this hole saw, and if you've not used hole saws before, I mean, if you don't have one, you could do this by hand. You could, get a compass, trace it out, get a scroll saw, do a jigsaw. I mean, you can do it. It's just neater and faster with a hole saw. All right, so this one is the body of the guitar, and we're taking that hole, that nail hole that we put in there, and we've got a 2-inch hole saw here, and we're going to take a little hole out of that. Now for me, I always save these pieces when I pop them out of the hole saw. That's half the reason I use a hole saw instead of maybe a big Forstner bit or something like that, especially in these smaller ones. I save those, and you never know. I've got a big bucket of them, and sometimes you use them on other projects. Sometimes you throw them in the fireplace, but I like to hang on to them, so do what you need to do there. Alright, we've got our holes drilled, and now this is the only opportunity you really have to sand the inside of that hole. So get the inside of that hole sanded, get those little burrs off, and you don't have a better chance to sand the inside of the hole, because we're about to sandwich this with another piece of wood to make it all nice and pretty. And if you want to sand inside that hole nicely, now's your time. This would also be a good time if you needed to surface sand any of your wood, where if you had a rougher piece of wood, something like that needed to be surface sanded, to surface sand the pieces that are going to get glued together. Most of the time, that's not necessary, but every once in a while you get some that need to be sanded up before you glue them together. Because remember, we are going to have part of that wood poking out through this hole, so if it's rough, you need to sand it now. This board was actually really nice, because I try not to buy the rough boards, but sometimes that's just what you have, so that's what you use. But get these all sanded up nicely. And you can use a drum sander or something like that, which I have some drums I put on my drill and use. But to be honest, it's not that hard with a good piece of sandpaper to just get the inside of those and get any burrs or anything you have off of there. Alright, we've got both pieces for the guitar now. And I'm just kind of making sure everything looks good here. You can see where they're a little warped from each other, stuff like that. And it's okay on this project because we're going to glue these things together. Alright, so plenty of glue. Now avoid getting it really close to an inside hole, because that's, you can clean it out, but if you don't have to, don't. Don't make yourself more work than is necessary. It's just not something you want to do. Get it all nice and spread out. I just use my finger. Finger cleans off easy. You just grab you an old sock, wipe glue off on. That way you don't have to buy a shop rag. Yeah, there's my old sock. You can see, man, it's been used once or twice. So we're just going to line those up. And when the board's warped like this, it sometimes becomes a challenge. You can see like it just doesn't want to stay together for me. So a little thing to do here would be to just line up one corner and just put a clamp on it. You don't have to put it on real hard, but just put a clamp on it to kind of keep things from moving around. And then we're going to take 2 pieces of scrap lumber. In this case, it's just hardwood. I do believe both of these are hickory, so it ain't going nowhere. And we're going to use that to keep it straight and keep it and uncup it, because it was actually a cupped piece of wood. Because cupped is when it's sideways, and warped is when it's down the length of the grain. So we're going to use those two to make sure it glues up nice and straight. So we're going to take those, glue it up nicely, and use those to straighten it out. Take your time here. Make sure the sides match up. that kind of thing. It'll make your life a lot easier on the other side. So get you 2 more pieces. Same thing on this side. Make sure you get good contact. Make sure everything's all flushed up. And just use those 2 pieces of wood. You could use 2 big pieces and just sandwich the whole thing if you need to. These are the scraps that I cut off of other projects, so there's no reason not to use them. So just make sure everything is all nice and smooth, and you're good to go on there. Alright, when we come to our banjo, we have square pieces. Now, for stability's sake, and for the sake of aesthetics, because I think it looks better that way, is we're going to glue it cross grain. We're going to take the grain and crisscrosses. So the grains will not be both go in the same direction on this piece. And if you remember from before, and I got way too much glue here. You get too much glue, don't deal with it all squeezing out. Blot some of that stuff off first. I mean, if you'd rather it squeeze out, and you're like, oh yeah, let's do that and clean up that mess, you go for it. There are some schools of thought you get a better connection that way, but I have never seen a problem or had a problem with doing it this way. So like I say, we're just going to take that and we're going to glue it right cross grain. You can see right there. And I purposely made sure I glued the tag out because I don't want to scrape the tag off. I'm just going to sand it off later. And again here, we're just going to take our 2 boards and we're going to just 2 pieces of scrap wood. We're going to line that up, clamp it together, and let it dry. Alright, make sure these are nice and dried up. You know, it's 20 minutes to cure on the glue that I have. And, you know, I easily let it sit for a little longer than that on these. I like to go about an hour just because I am going to be cutting and sanding and stuff. They're going to get some good pressure on them. So, all we're doing here is holes already cut. We're lining up the pattern. We're putting the pattern on and we're just going to trace it through. When I put the pattern on, hard to tell in the video, but I kind of felt through to make sure that that hole I drilled was right where that hole in the pattern was. And what that does for you is make sure that you have it in the right spot. And so we're just going to come through, we're going to trace out this pattern, and then we're going to do the same thing on the banjo. We're going to lay that over the top, and we're going to trace it out. This is where you will need the pattern from below this video. There's no real way around that. Unless you want to freehand your own guitar, then, you know, go for it. You're a much better drawer than I am. It took me a long time to get to that shape. Takes me days sometimes to make a pattern. Just because I'm not an artistic person. I'm more technical. And when it comes to curves and things, it takes me a minute. Alright, so you just want to lay that circle right on top of this 5.5 inch square. It's a 5.5 inch square. Just take the circle to all the edges and just trace it right out so we can cut it off. Alright, to the bandsaw now. And you could do this with a jigsaw. You can do this by hand, however you like. But just come in, follow the lines. I mean, it's just like when you're coloring. Just stay inside the lines. In this case, on the outside of the line. And just be patient. Bring it right on through. A word thing about the bandsaw blades. This is a 6-tooth blade. I do not use real fine blades. I've used them in the past. I find I get just as nice of a cut or better from less teeth on the blades because I do a lot of hardwoods. It goes through a little easier, it cuts a little better, and just all in general, I mean, I'm gonna sand it anyway, so if it and I really haven't noticed it being any rougher really at all. Alright, so now we're going to take that 2-inch piece that we cut, and we're going to find the center. And I'm doing a little cheat here. I got a 3/4 inch piece of wood. It's 1.5 wide. Perfect. 2 lines, and they're going to be a little apart because, of course, 3/4 is exactly half of it. You put the line on. So you just put those 2 lines on there, run the bandsaw blade right between them, and you're perfectly in half. You can also measure it out if you like. It's just, those little cheats like that, or what do they call them now? Life hacks. They're nice to know. So now we're doing, all of the pegs are 1/2 inch apart. So we're just putting some 1/2 inch marks on here while we got both of them still together. And because that's where the pegs are going to go later. And we'll worry about lining up that hole later when we get over by the drill. But right now we're going to cut this one in half and have these 2 pieces. One for the banjo and one for the guitar. Alright, so now we got another piece of our 1/4 inch oak. And on this one I'm using oak. This is the top part. And I don't know what it's called. I could probably look it up, but some of you guys that do a lot of music and stuff may know what it's called. I don't. It's the top part as far as I'm concerned. So it's the top part that holds the other pegs to stretch the rubber bands on. And we're just going to trace that out. And nothing big, no big deal here. Just get it nice and traced out. Grab a little bit of a nail or something and just kind of push it in there. If you need to tap it in with a hammer, you can. But just mark where each one of those holes are going to be. Just get right on the center. Just cut that template out of the pattern and just put them right on in there. We're going to need 2 of these, of course, because we have the banjo. I almost called it a bandsaw. Wow. But we have the banjo and the guitar. So we're going to use, it's the same piece for both of them. No need to make a different piece for either one. Alright, we're going to get these 2 pieces cut out. And just keep the outside of that line to the inside of the blade. Just be very patient. Cut them out. This curve is a curve that most bandsaws can do. Unless you have a really thick blade. If you have a real thick blade, you may have to make this and, cut it out as square and maybe fix it on the sander or cut it out with a smaller saw. But this blade is only 1/4 inch thick, so it makes about a good 2-inch round real easy. So that's all we're looking for, is just cut those pieces out and then we can move on to the next step. Alright, so what we got here is a 1/4 inch poplar dowel rod, and we're going to cut 1-inch pieces. We need 6 pieces for each instrument, so we're going to need 12 in total. And we're just going to measure that first one. We're going to cut it, and then we're just going to hold that first one up to the dowel and just use it as a guide to cut the others. This is not a precise thing. As long as you get them really close to each other, you do not have to measure each and every one. In fact, this is actually becomes very accurate because they all become exactly the same length this way. If you're not comfortable doing this way, do it the way you're comfortable with. Alright, so here we have those 2 pieces we've got for the bottom pegs. And since they were 1.5 inches to start with, we cut them in half, then they're 3/4. So I've just got a 3/8 piece of wood here that I'm doing the same thing I did earlier, just making a mark down each side. And you can see the 2 marks are a little bit apart, and you just stick the drill bit right between them. Now again, if you want to measure this out, if you want to use a centering jig and get the, and get it exactly where you want it, things like that, you can. You can also put the pattern up there and do it that way as well. There's a lot of different ways to do this right. What matters is those holes are all 1/2 inch apart and they're in the center. That's the only thing that really matters. These holes are going to go all the way through. I'm of course using a brad point drill bit. The brad point drill bit allows me to really get the center and really hit the mark right where I want to hit it. You can use bullet point if you want, and if that's what you have, use them. Just, be careful that you're getting it in the center. It's always nice to have a good backer board. This stops the drill bit from splintering anything out in the backside. These holes do go all the way through. Make sure you're moving it with each hole so that it's doing its job. There's a hole in the center of the drill press plate, so you don't necessarily have to have it there to protect your drill bit, but it does make it nicer to drill, and you get a cleaner hole. Alright, same deal on both tops, all the way through, 1/4-inch holes, and just that's why we put that dot there with the nail. Just put them right on the dot, line them up, and all the measurements that are on the pattern as well. If you feel better measuring them out, you can. Not going to hurt anything. Don't really think you'll see a difference between the two, but it's just whatever makes you happy and however you like to work. Alright, let's get these pieces all sanded up. We've got the body of the guitar here, obviously, and we're going to sand its surfaces. We're going to make sure it's all nice and pretty, and we're just going to sand the sides. We're going to get them all rounded over nicely, make them look good. Word about our sandpaper, we're using 220 grit. It's the only grit of sandpaper I use. I personally don't see any need to go higher, and I don't see any need to go lower. If you need to hog off that much material, you might consider using a saw first. So I'm using that wheel. It's a 2-inch diameter wheel, just about, I think it's like 1 3/4 in the back of that sander there. And there's a spot right in front of the wheel on all belt sanders that before that plate kicks in, because there's a plate in there that keeps it all nice and level, and there's a spot right in front of that wheel that is a little softer, that is really, really good for, since it's not real hardcore, to help you round some of those things off. It's just, if you're comfortable doing this on the belt sander, do it. If you're not comfortable doing this on the belt sander, then just hand sand it. Use a hand sander. A hand sander will do this nicely. Belt sander's faster. So I'm going to use the tool if I have it. If I don't have it, I'll find a workaround. But we're going to do what we need to do here. Alright, belt cleaning stick. Just a chunk of rubber. You can find them online, most hardware stores, things like that. And all it does is remove the sawdust from the grit of your sandpaper. It will extend the life of your sandpaper, especially on a belt sander, by 2-3 times longer, maybe more. And just a really nice thing to have. There was a time that I didn't know those existed, and man, I wish I could go back to those times on all the belts that I thought were gone when they really weren't. Because those belts are not the cheapest things to buy. So what I'm doing here is I'm now hitting the edges, and I'm just using the belt sander to knock those edges down. I'm going to clean them up, make them all nice and rounded over with the hand sander. Alright, here we've got the necks of the guitar and the banjo, and we're just going to get those nicely sanded on all surfaces. It's poplar. Poplar sands pretty nicely, and again, you can make this out of any wood you like. I like the combination, the contrast between the two woods. It looks really nice. Alright, so that 45-degree angle that we cut into it earlier, this is what we're doing. We're coming up here on the belt sander, and we're just making a nice rocking motion, and what that's doing is that's rounding that off. It starts as a geometric angle, and you just sit there and rock it right on the belt sander like that, and just turn it into a nice rounded off. You can of course do this by hand or with a hand sander. It's really not hard to do this part. And then we're going to come and we're going to get all of the sides rounded over. Because this is the neck of the guitar and the banjo. And of course we want this to look really nice, really smooth, that kind of thing. But so just make sure all of the edges, all of those things are all rounded off nicely. Now we've got the bottom pieces, and we're just going to surface sand all sides there. Really simple. This is probably one of the easiest parts to sand. Alright, now one side of this goes connected to the guitar and the banjo. So do not round that side. Pick which side you want as the front, and then round all the edges except for what's going to be in contact with the wood. If you make a mistake and you round it all, it still will glue up nice and you could still use it. It'll just change the look on its final thing. So on these, especially since they're a little smaller, I tend to go ahead and grab the hand sander and finish them up as far as making them all nice and pretty. Alright, same thing with the tops. We're just going to sand them. I'm going to sand the surfaces first. We're going to round them over nicely. I don't usually get too rounded over on this one. Kind of like not quite relieved, but a little more rounded than that. You know, we'll put up some photos of the finish there, and you can kind of see how I did it. It's a personal preference. If you want it really drastically rounded, you can do it. It's whatever you like there, but same techniques, same everything, just different piece. Alright, here we have the pegs. And there's a variety of ways to sand these pegs. You can use the hand sander. You can twirl it around on the belt like that, on a regular sheet of sandpaper. There's a variety of ways to do this, and I'm kind of trying to show you all of them just because there's no right or wrong way. All we're really doing is kind of rounding those pegs off a little bit. We really don't need the whole length of it. It's there to give you a little bit of extra room, especially since, you know, maybe a small child might be putting the rubber band on these things. You get a little bit extra room there, you know, for little fingers to do their thing. But the twirling it around on the belt is probably one of my favorites. But there are other ways to do it just as nicely. You can do, just like here I'm showing you on the belt. Just take it right on the edge of the belt. And you're basically doing the same thing that you were doing with it not moving. It's just that it's just a little different technique. So just whatever it is, we're just kind of just rounding over, almost like capping them over, if you will. And be sure that you're only doing this to one end of the dowels, because one end's going to go inside the holes that we drilled. All right, now we're going to put this together. For me, this is the best part, because I love it when all the pieces start coming together and start looking like a real object. You know, we've been trying to make the guitar and the banjo this whole time, and you know, it just starts coming together at this point. So all those little holes, if you get some extra glue, get rid of it, but get you a nail in there, smear the glue around. This gives you full contact all the way through. And we'll set our dowels in there in a minute after we get them both set up. Alright, so we're going to set our dowel rods in there, and it's going to be the rounded spot to the top and the flat side on the bottom. And I'm just setting them in there real quick. I find it much easier to set them in and then just tap them in the rest of the way, then to try to fight it. There's no need to fight it. You could do a 30-second bigger drill bit where they slide in a little easier, but I kind of like, especially since they're going to be under the tension of the rubber band, I like them to fit nice and snug. You add that glue in there, and then it's just a nice snug fit. So you're just tapping these down to where it's level. Now, if you need to, when you get done here, to sand that level on the back where you've got maybe a dowel rod sticking out a little bit or something like that, just make sure it's flat on the back there. So if you need to run it across some sandpaper or something like that, do it, because otherwise it will affect your glue up. Like I got that one a little far in, so I'm going to hammer that one back out. So it will affect your glue up if it's not flat. So if you need to put a little sandpaper to it and make it flat, go for it. We've got the tops, and we're not putting the dowel rods in those first. We're going to put those in afterwards. And I'll show you why here in a minute, because it's just too small of a space to work with. All right? So, yeah, you got to open the glue. The glue only works if you actually open it. All right. So, we're going to put that on there. And if you notice, the rounded part is in the back. So, we're coming up to the wider part. And this is where, if you want to make it right or left-handed, you can. Right-handed would be the furthest hole away from you is on top. And left-handed, same way. Just hold it the way you would hold an instrument. And then you'll know which way you want to do, right or left-handed. Honestly, I don't really think it matters. It's a child's toy. So, but all we're doing here is we're eyeballing. You can measure if you like, but I don't think it's necessary. Just eyeball that thing right in the middle and then make sure that neck is covering all of the holes. And that's all you really need. Just eyeball it and then clamp it down. All right, get some clamps on that. Hold that down nice. Get some glue in each one of the holes, and it doesn't take much glue. These are only quarter inch deep holes, so it's not like there's a lot there. But what's nice about this is it also holds from the back. It's still a very strong hold, especially with that oak. So take your nail, move that glue around. This is also a good time where, like, if you've got too much in a hole, just take that nail, pull some of it out. If you'd rather wipe it off later, you can. It just makes a mess. It's not necessary. So get those pegs set up in there. And again, I'm just barely putting them in. I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to come back with the hammer and just tap those in. Clamp's kind of in my way. And that clamp's coming off. That's fine. Let's get these things hammered in. Give them a nice solid connection, and we'll put the clamp back on. All right, we're going to set those next to the side, and we're going to put the base pegs on. So we're just going to get some glue on those. And especially on the banjo. Banjo's really easy. It's round, guys. So pick the way you want it to go, whether you want cross grain, diagonal grain, doesn't matter. And I put it about 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch in from the bottom there. And just make sure it's the same distance on both sides. Clamp it down and go. I do have this on the pattern. You can always make that cut out of the pattern and use that as a guide for exactly where you want it. But I personally prefer just to kind of eyeball it in. On the guitar, it's a little trickier, so you might want to consult the pattern. I've made a lot of these at this point, so I don't necessarily need to consult the pattern. I made the pattern. So all we're doing is getting it right in the center, and you just want to look down the guitar. Even if you use the pattern, still look down the guitar, look at it, make sure that it looks like it's lining up nicely and that it's in the center. Sometimes takes a minute, Take your time. When you get done, clamp it down. All right, everything is set, and we're going to now get the neck put on this guitar. Well, I'm sorry, guitar. That's the banjo. Wow. I should stick to woodworking. I'm not going to start a band anytime soon. All right, so 3/4 of an inch in on that neck. Get us a nice coverage of glue. Get off any excess you think you don't need now. It's much easier to do it now than later. And let's get it all lined up. All right, we're going to get a clamp on here. Hold that down. And then we're just going to go from the peg to peg. And we're going to use our straight edge here to make sure that it's straight so that it looks good. Because nothing will tell on you more than a stretched out rubber band. It's going to stretch out completely straight. So if the neck is crooked, you're going to see it real easy and real fast. So just take a few minutes, use a straight edge, and help yourself line it up. And same glue up with the guitar, 3/4 of an inch. Spread your glue, line it up with your straight edge. When you line up with the straight edge, what you're looking for is that the neck and the hole and everything is all nice and lined up. Use the straight edge to mimic what the rubber band would do. And you really could go get you a rubber band and put it between the two if you like, but it puts a little bit of undue pressure on those two things, and you can see right there how I'm getting it lined up. So just use a straight edge, line it up nicely, clamp it off, let it sit. All right, time to finish these things. For me, since I've used oak and poplar, and I want to keep the beauty of that wood, it's also a toy, and so I want to make sure that it's got a nice food-safe finish. What I'm using here is a butcher block conditioner. You could use just about anything. I mean, you can paint it. You can do anything you want to do. You can make the whole thing out of poplar and paint it and, decorate it up really nicely. But it's a personal preference at this point. For me, we're putting some beeswax mineral oil mix, which is the butcher block conditioner. I'm using an old sock to apply it. This sock has applied a lot of the beeswax mineral oil combination in its life. It kind of sits there just ready for me to use when I need it. The conditioner doesn't go bad, so it's perfectly fine to have it like this. And we're just going to get in all the crevices and make them all pretty. I mean, look at the difference between, you can see the banjo that hasn't been treated and the guitar that has, and the difference is night and day. It makes it so much prettier. Now we're going to take a clean sock and come and wipe off any extra of that butcher block conditioner that might be on there. And it's still going to feel like there's something on there. You wipe off the excess like this, and the rest will soak in about 24 hours. Just let it sit overnight, and you're usually in pretty good shape. But you just want to come through, wipe off the rest, and then we'll get it all strung up. All right, we're ready to string these up and make some music. What I'm using here is a size 33 rubber band. You can find these in almost every office supply store. You could use any type of rubber band you like. I prefer the size 33s. I think they look better and they sound actually pretty decent too. I mean, for a rubber band on a piece of wood, it sounds great. What's nice about these is that you can't hear them in the next room, and the kids just love them. They'll sit there and rock out all day long. Never know, you might be working on the next musical genius. All right here, I need you to just go ahead and imagine the best guitar solo you've ever heard, because I mean that's exactly how I hear it. Have a great day, and I would love to see what you've made out of these below the video.